This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. What I'm looking at today is 2024's The Strangers, Chapter 1, directed by Renny Harlin. And as I've said many times, I'm not a fan of Bryan Bertino's 2008 The Strangers, which he also wrote. Because the killers, the antagonists in that movie, assume all sorts of abilities and powers they shouldn't have. They move silently. They're able to enter places without anyone knowing that they're there. And it had overtones of a supernatural movie. Now keep in mind, it wasn't. That irritated me because it's not. And based on my research, Bertino's came upon the idea of The Strangers from personal life. Someone visited his house when he was younger and asked if whomever was home, and they were looking to rob houses that couldn't get responses to that question, as well as the Manson family murderers, which by no means were supernatural. And so the tendency in his movies to have the killers move so effortlessly through space, so undetectably, just irritated me. That being said, it's a well-done movie, it's a well-shot movie, but it's not a very grounded movie, grounded in reality. And so this is why I always prefer Johannes Roberts' Strangers Prey at Night, because he grounded his antagonists. He made them more human. They weren't doing a lot of vanishing and drifting through space without sound. And they, by my reckoning at any rate, seemed scarier, and I enjoyed that a lot. Though, when I heard that Renny Harlin was directing a trilogy based on Brian Boitano's original movie, what first came to mind was, why are you making a trilogy based on a single movie? Is there not something lacking? Namely material? And if The Strangers could have been made to a trilogy, wouldn't it have been done already? But in any case, from what I've read, the screenplay for The Strangers trilogy was just so well done and interesting that the decision was made to make a series of 3 movies as opposed to a single one. So that's interesting. I don't know if there's enough there to bear that weight, but it's an interesting idea. And as I've said, I like Renny Harlin as a director. He did Deep Blue Sea, he did Die Hard 2. He is a really interesting director, and I tend to like his work. The story for The Strangers Chapter 1 is essentially the same story for Brian Boitano's movie, which is to say you have a bunch of people who visit his house, and they're terrorized by these 3 individuals, so on and so forth. It's the same movie in that respect, and much to my dismay, oftentimes the killers do the exact same thing they did in Bryan Bertino's movie, which is to say they just appear in places and disappear seemingly almost as quickly. I find that irritating because this is not supernatural, and it leads me to believe that white people don't have a sense of intuition, which is to say, if there's someone looking at you or there's someone present that you're not aware of, you sense something. And I guess that always bothers me about this type of thing. I think I have a very well-honed sense of intuition. And so when I see movies where people just are oblivious to the world around them, it just irritates me. Though, as I said, Renny Harlin does similar with his movie. Though the difference, which I alluded to earlier, is simply that since there are 2 movies in this series, it is a trilogy, this movie implies that there are other people involved. And when the couple visit this diner, everyone acts a little off towards them. It's really interesting because it implies that what's going on is greater than what we see. It hints at other people being involved. And that works for me because it begins to make sense and to explain how these people are able to do what they do. For instance, I bitched endlessly about how the killers seem to just appear in this house. But the house is something that the couple is given access to because they have nowhere else to stay. It implies a trap, in other words. So therefore, that the killers have access to the house makes sense because the killers were among those people we saw in the diner. I have my suspicions of who they are, at least the women, because I think there are only 2 or 3 other women in the movie, making it highly likely we saw at least one of the female killers in that diner, and I suspect I know who it is. But in any case, it is more logical. It gives you possible explanations for why the killers are able to just be in their house. It's not a magic trick. They're not ghosts. This is a setup, and they do this often to other people who visit their town. In fact, it opens with the death of some highly placed person, I want to say in insurance, but it may have been technology, some such thing. I don't think necessarily that The Strangers Chapter 1 is better than Brian Boitano's original movie. What I do think is that The Strangers Chapter 1 expands the story more and explains away some of the more irritating facets of Brian Boitano's movie. And since it is a trilogy, you can't necessarily judge it by the first movie. It is telling a story that we're already familiar with, but it's also, in that telling, beginning to expand it. And it will expand it more in the second movie. So on the face of it, it's very similar to Brian Boitano's movie because it is telling a very similar story. But it's different enough that it's introducing elements that elevate it beyond the original. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. Or as usual, consider a like, follow, or buy me a coffee.